Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, as always, Connor Reed Bush, and with me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, how you doing, buddy?
Not too bad, not too bad. I think we got an interesting, we're at an interesting point where we've got kind of lots of fun things going on in combat sports, or at least lots of interesting things, like things running spectrum from awful and terrifying to the actually legitimately fascinating, and there's just a lot of it. We've got, let's see, coming up on this UFC card. Frankly, I mean, should I even mention that no one gives a shit about the undercard? Would that undercut the point that no one gives a shit because you don't have to? Rob Font versus Jose Aldo is the main event, which is a fantastic fight. Eminently fascinating, Phil. And the co-main event, Brad Riddell versus Rafael Fiziev, is in fact a fight that I asked for. So it's good to hear that in addition to, I mean, it's just a whole smattering of celebrities and movers and shakers, the actual UFC matchmakers listen to this podcast. Isn't that gratifying? Yeah. I mean, and it was such a subtle and left field choice that there's no choice but
indelible though. I think it's no one would have thought of it, but once it's in your head, you're like, of course, that's the only fight to make. It's so. So anyway, not to praise my matchmaking skills over much before we get to that one, but we also have Sergio Pettis is fighting Kyoji Horiguchi in the is it just Bellator? Is it Bellator in one? Is it? I think it's just Bellator. I think it's just the Bellator Championship. I don't think are they unifying anything? Or not even one, of course. Kyoji's been fighting in Ryzen. Not one. Yeah. I think it's just, So we're going to talk about that. If we were better combat sports fans, we might talk about, the boxing match that happened last weekend. Teofimo Lopez, basically, as you put it, rapidly squandered all the momentum and goodwill he had off of a shocking upset victory over Vasyl Lomachenko. But we didn't. So we can only say good job, George Kambosos. And let's talk about Aldo Font, because that's the thing I really want to talk about, Phil. I was so eager that last week, the week before last, I was like, coming up next week, we have a tremendous fight. And of course we didn't. There was no UFC card. I have been anticipating it and fearing it for some time now. So tell me, is my son, Jose, going to die? I mean, you always got to prepare yourself for that possibility these days, right? Yeah. I mean, for all that he looks, as we've mentioned, like, genuinely and consistently fantastic in a baffling way over his last few fights. At some point, it has to stop working, right? Yeah. Rob Font is a huge bantamweight with massive hands who's not going to get tired and is going to work behind his jab and is going to be there for 5 rounds. He's got a physique reminiscent of a certain Conor McGregor, you might even say. Yeah. I mean, so, Aldo's last 2 were a super slow man and a super slow man who was also tiny. Yeah. I think the interesting thing is that Font is still not a quick man. No. And that's probably, I think, where a lot of the interest from this kind of lies. That he is someone who has been beaten in the past by a crafty Brazilian counterpuncher. Well, there we come to what is, to me, the real question of this matchup. Is Jose Aldo better than Cody Garbrandt and as good as, what was it, 2019? 2018 Rafael Assunção? Because that's kind of the gulf
I can see Jose Aldo occupying in this fight, right? We've, as you said, we have an example of Rob Font getting. Frankly, there's a lot in that Sun Tzu fight of Font's to make an Aldo fan glad.
Mm-hmm.
He counterpunched him and sort of like seemed to just shut down his confidence in the first round. He out-wrestled him when Font got anxious looking for the punching exchanges, and then more than Cody Garbrandt was able to, held him down and landed some shots. I suspect Jose Aldo is a slightly better top control grappler than Cody Garbrandt. And then he just out-jabbed him for the third round. Feinted, jabbed, fenced him. So, like, yeah. Jose Aldo can do that stuff, right?
Of course he can. I mean, I think it's a little disingenuous to like, have Assunção as the benchmark, because the main thing is that Rob Font has clearly gotten like a reasonable amount better since then.
Well, in what way? Because that's kind of what I was pondering over, and I'm not sure if I have a concrete diagnosis of what exactly Rob Font has improved.
I mean, I think because it's tricky to determine, right? He's one of these guys where he's in essentially the same person. I think he's a rote fighter, the sort of coachable Edson Barboza mold, who's just going to sit there and grind it out and get better at what he's already good at. I think the things that you can see as an improvement are just that kind of he sits down on his jab a bit less. It's a bit harder to counter him. He feints more. He keeps his eyes on his opponents more when he's in exchanges. Like, he's harder to scare off. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points in his past fights where he has been scared off,
mm-hmm.
by Brazilians for some reason. It does seem to be like the.
What are you accusing about, Phil? Exactly.
No, but I mean, I think he's just the reason why he's learned these basics is because they are good basics to learn, and he's someone who's just ground them into himself over time. So I don't think he's not like a dramatically different fighter.
Sure,
but I think just like in terms of composure, in terms of like building off his own offense, I think he's just I think he is just like a better fighter. I'm not sure I would pick that same Assunção outcome to happen if he fought him again.
Okay, I'm not 100% sold on that. I mean, I can't deny that Font has just sort of gotten better in the quiet way that like technicians do. He's always been a pretty meat and potatoes guy who stands out because he's got a big frame and lots of power. Although I should point out, relative to Aldo, at least according to Wikipedia, he's an inch taller and has an inch more reach. So it's not such a size advantage in this particular fight. But he's a meat and potatoes guy. He's gotten, more confident in his jab. I think certainly what we saw in the Garbrandt fight is that Font, I think, is better at working off his jab in a variety of ways, whether it's setting up counters, setting up different kinds of combinations other than just the 1-2. Not putting so much into it, kind of. That's kind of my analysis at this point, because to me, the really big difference between how Assunção fought Rob Font and how Cody Garbrandt fought him is that Assunção did precisely what we praised Jose Aldo for in his last fight against Pedro Munoz, which is that he stood his ground without exchanging.
Mm-hmm.
And Cody Garbrandt was really, really flighty against Rob Font. I think Garbrandt obviously came into that fight with the mindset of, okay, don't stand your ground, don't trade. Our goal, he was a Mark Henry fighter, at that point. I don't know if he's still training with Mark Henry. But it ended up looking a little bit like a Edson Barboza loss.
Yeah.
Where he just can't stop running away on the end of the guy's jab. And if you watch how Asuncao dealt with Rob Font's jab, and we can go further into, what the differences between those two jabs may be. But he, like Jose Aldo, very economical with his movement. Would take a step back when Font committed to a strike. Would feint him. Would use a variety of different methods of defense to be able to stand his ground and bait out the exchanges that actually favored him. That's the thing Cody couldn't do. Like, literally, he backed up against the fence and did that thing where he pretends he's tying his shoelaces so he can punch you in the mouth. Like 8 times. So I do think there's a difference in like the sort of subtlety of counter punching and let's say, I guess it's ring generalship. Between what Asuncao did and what Garbrandt did. And that's kind of what has me feeling like this might actually kind of be a good fight for Jose. What we saw him do against Pedro Munoz was the best ever iteration of jabbing, moving just enough only when he needs to move, countering when he needs to counter, and sensing those moments when, rather than letting the opponent force it on him, sort of like, again, Asuncao did this to Font as well, sensing those moments when he needed to make an impression and try to trigger that little thing in Rob Font's brain that makes him think, maybe I don't want to trade in the pocket with this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons to favor Font, but I'm obviously trying to find, to favor Aldo, but I'm obviously trying to find reasons why. Yeah. People should be sad and worried because otherwise they'll be upset when,
it'll be both of our fault instead of just mine.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that one of the issues with Font, I think in the Asuncao fight and probably still now, is at, as opposed to say a Holloway who could use his jab to push Aldo around, he's gotten better at like using his jab to invite counters. Like he throws he'll throw the jab and then have like an uppercut to the body or just a straight up uppercut when the opponent comes in. But he doesn't really have that much diversity in his like lead hand, particularly when he's on offense. It's pretty much jab, double jab, or like 1-2.
Yeah.
He's not like big hooker, doesn't work the body that much. And as we've seen, like someone who has a library of counters to the jab, i.e. slipping and going to the body, throwing the right hand, or just low kicking him, seems almost guaranteed to give him trouble.
Yeah, we've seen it work in the past for more fighters than the main two that we're comparing Aldo to as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things why I think we were saying that like Cody Garbrandt had a good chance is that one of the only range strikes Garbrandt really throws is a low kick, and I didn't really feel like Font did a great job of shutting that down. It was rather that, as you said, Garbrandt was so flighty that he was constantly on the back foot. Yeah, but like he still cleanly low kicked Rob Font tons of times. I mean, not tons of times, but whenever he went for it, essentially.
He landed plenty early, and then it was, I think just being kept on the back foot. Again, it was a weirdly Edson Barboza performance from Cody Garbrandt. And, and I think maybe, in retrospect, maybe having a low kick be your only range tool is bad. Like, there was another little narrative in that fight. And it was that when Cody did use his jab, it worked very well. That's a good point, actually. It worked very well. As did Asuncao, as did Marlon Moraes' at point. Maybe Marlon's another fighter we could bring into the comparison here. He's like the ultimate end of brokenness for this type of matchup. But he landed his jab on Rob Font as well. Basically everyone does, because I think the problem with Rob Font is he's, as much as he's good at working off that jab, the jab is the linchpin, and it's not as surprising, I think, as a jab should be. A lot of his best shots that come off of it come because the opponent sees it coming and makes a read, or chooses a reaction. He tends to step in really hard with his jab still. He did that a lot against Garbrandt. Kind of comes in on like a flat foot, like front foot heavy. And can just kind of sometimes sort of pile into range. And for against Garbrandt, it worked because it drove him backwards. But I don't think I don't think that is all that much different from the same jab that we have seen other people out jabbing and countering in the past. More, subtle, confident fighters. So I don't know. Problem is, Phil, it's oh yeah, go on.
I also just like a lot of it is just that he's also just kind of there to be hit.
Rob Font?
Yeah.
He is, yeah.
I think, it's quite telling that his best performances have typically been against, like...
tiny people?
Yeah.
People who, like, literally just aren't in range to hit him back when he hits them? Like Sergio Pettis?
I was expecting a genuinely, like, competitive fight between him and Sergio Pettis based on the skill level.
Right.
But then I just watching that fight, it was just kind of realized that's Rob Font's ideal fight.
Yeah.
Someone that he can just physically overpower from miles away.
Yes.
Because he is, crushingly powerful if you're stuck on the end of his reach without a way of getting inside it.
Yeah. So, I don't want to undersell Rob Font. I think he's also one of those guys where the opposite is true of the whole, like, the you can shut him out of the fight dynamic, or you can occasionally, like, change his mind about how much he wants to really fight you, or put him into, like, an overthinking sort of mode. The opposite of that is that when Rob Font is bullying you, as he ultimately did to Cody Garbrandt, as he did to Sergio Pettis, he becomes an increasingly subtle and creative fighter. Over the course
he's
of the
an
fight.
immense finisher.
Absolutely. And his jab will get more varied, and he will feint more, and his rhythm will change. Like, the more confident Rob Font gets, the smoother his striking gets, the less sort of meat and potatoes mechanical. But there are problems. I think like an exchange by exchange basis, I actually quite like Aldo in this fight. But the problems, Phil. Like, for example, that Aldo keeps getting rocked in the first round. Basically every fight now. I guess it didn't happen against Munoz.
Vera. To be fair, that was never going to happen.
No, that was never going to happen. But, when he faces, like, punchers who are good at setting up their shots, which I don't think is Munoz, or necessarily Vera. It's just, this is the dire Marlon Moraes end of this matchup spectrum, is what happens if Rob Font just, like, it initiates a trade, and it hurts Jose. Now again, still haven't seen that, unless it's Conor McGregor, which I guess I'd already made the physicality comparison. Still haven't seen that result in an instant loss. Most of the time for Aldo, he manages to recover from it really well, even when it looks dire. But that's a concern. It's a 5-rounder.
I think that is the big one.
That's the really big concern. Now, looked like Aldo could have gone another couple rounds against Pedro Munoz. Looked fine.
Mm-hmm.
Managed that fight, like, masterfully. But Rob Font's not Pedro Munoz.
Admittedly, Rob Font lost to Pedro Munoz.
That's true. He's worse than Pedro Munoz. So it's Jose Aldo, folks. Second round TKO. Easy pick.
But yeah, I mean, there's a definite drop-off in the Munoz and Vera fights.
From Aldo. Of volume?
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't against Munoz, was there? I thought the third round was like his most active.
Actually, no, not the Munoz one, but I mean against.
There's a reason we gushed about that fight quite as much as we did. Like, it was
a
beautifully
that's right. But I think Chito was a bit more concerning.
Yeah. Just a long guy who
he's
just won't
definitely
stop pressuring.
Much more of the Font analog in this one. That he's just huge, really durable. And kind of plodding, but like just gonna be there, like basically a featherweight again. Jose Aldo fighting a reasonably sized featherweight again.
But will Font keep coming? Chito Vera always will. No matter what you hit him with, there's gonna come a point in the fight, no matter how badly you scare him, and I have seen Chito Vera a little scared before, he will be coming on at the end of the fight. Is that true of Rob Font? If he is successfully managed as he was by, again, Rafael Assunção, which I think is the ultimate parallel for, if Jose Aldo can do to Rob Font what he did to Pedro Munoz, it'll look like Rob Font's fight with Assunção.
Yeah. Okay, I'll sign off on it. You better be right, Connor.
I don't know that I'm right. I think he might do great and then just
you said 100%. Jose Aldo is not getting exhausted in round 5, and then they're not going to give us another another one of these unnecessary 2.5 minute long finishing sequences from a snuff film.
No,
you said we're not going to get that. You said there's no way he's gonna shift into a weird step knee or something from Font in the first round and immediately die. You said none of that was going to happen. It was going to dominate from start to end, and I'm trusting you.
Well, let me just undercut that impression with a couple more concerns. Rob Font is super durable.
He's very, very durable.
He's very durable. So even by accident, if things are going really badly against him, if, say, Aldo stuns him and is going for a finish, that might be the thing that triggers just the slightly less shop-worn fighter in Rob Font to just trade with Aldo, and that might work. That's a possibility. Again, his fight with John Lineker, I've seen the man scared out of a fight a bit, but I've also seen him hang tough against some murderous punchers. So that has me concerned. I don't know. I don't want to pick Jose anymore now that you've.
No, Connor. You've made the case. You've accepted responsibility. Jose Aldo's never gotten exhausted fighting someone who chased him around the ring with a double jab. No, it never
it's Mark
Hominick against Mark Hominick. Yeah,
it's Mark Hominick with power.
Yeah. No, but you said, and I'm trusting you. Okay. Jose Aldo by increasingly dominant decision. I'll take it. I feel way better now.
Well, you know what? Speaking of fighters developing, Rob Font's development might be, of the kind of subtle, a craftsman kind. Jose Aldo has definitely developed majorly since the Mark Hominick fight. There's no denying that.
Oh, yes.
In fact, that was the first boxing Jose Aldo fight, where he was in there slipping shots and countering and working his jab, and that's kind of been his whole thing since. So I don't know.
You ain't wrong.
He can land low kicks. He doesn't run away. He's not quick to flight, Jose Aldo. He will use his head movement and more subtle footwork. He will feint. He will use his jab. He can stand his ground and isn't really at that big of a size disadvantage.
So
I am
as
picking
you sort of
him.
mentioned, he does still have a very good chin himself.
Sure. He keeps getting rocked. But
he hasn't been
no.
knocked out, as you said, really, apart from McGregor.
It wasn't even a shot to the chin early on against Petr Yan. It was a body shot, which wouldn't that be some kind of horrific irony or something? I don't know. Rob Font does hit the body. Ooh, that might be a significant factor. If he can get those shots off. He hits the body a lot, actually.
See?
I don't know, Phil. Yeah, well, he
does throw a long right to the body sometimes.
Yeah, he does.
I remember him doing it like it was against Garbrandt. He was just having so much success jabbing him up.
That's true. He tries. I guess it varies, as it does for Jose sometimes too. But certainly against Garbrandt, he threw a lot of straight rights and jabs to the body. Okay, so I'm predicting it right here.
Yes, and I'm riding your wave of complete confidence.
Rob Font, jab to the body, eats the exact same counter knee that Aldo used to knock out Rolando Perez in 2009.
That would be very funny.
That would be sweet, right? But I'm picking him. Whatever. I know, like, there's a certain type of MMA nerd that really, really just gets off on Rob Font's very existence. I have occasionally been quite impressed with Rob Font, but I've never been super sold on him. All his best performances look like he's bullying someone, and then anytime he isn't bullying someone, I'm not that impressed. And I have a hard time seeing him just bullying Jose Aldo.
Fair enough.
So there we go. Rest in peace, Jose. Let's take a break, Phil. When we come back, co-main event, Brad Riddell, Rafael Fiziev, and then I guess we're going to talk about, we might just do like a sort of smattering alongside our brief prediction for Pettis versus Horiguchi. All of that and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. This Aldo Font, I don't know, it's a strange situation, Phil. I didn't agonize that much. Arriving at my conclusion that Jose Aldo would win, which is how we know he's going to lose. But for Brad Riddell, Rafael Fiziev, in which I have much less of a personal stake in this fight, I don't know who's going to win. And I think that's the only way I can begin the discussion of this tremendous co-main event. Oh, also, by the way, it was my idea, and it's a good one.
Certainly is. I mean, this is the matchup between two best strikers in the UFC who never throw jabs, or like super rarely throw jabs.
That's a good way of putting it. I was about to balk at best strikers because that's an involved discussion that I don't care to have. But among the best strikers who don't throw jabs, yeah, because they don't. And
that in and of itself is kind of weird because they're such like they're not big tall guys.
No.
And as such, and particularly Fiziev, they have been characterized by fighting against big tall guys, often with active jabs.
Sure.
It seems almost counterintuitive to see them fighting and winning, like largely with like hooks and right hands and counterpunches.
They are both exceptionally good at countering the jab, and is often off of their defense that they will. Well, I guess the main difference is that for Fiziev, defense is for entering range. He's usually the one pressing the issue. He reads as a far more insistent and aggressive fighter to such an extent that more than once we have seen him exhaust himself, just pushing a relentless pace. But he uses his defense to bridge that gap. And Riddell is more like, uses the defense to make you bridge the gap. Right? Both great counterpunchers, but Riddell, I think, is more of what you think of when you think counterpuncher. He wants you to fall in front of him so he can rip your head off. Fiziev is very much an aggressive counterpuncher who will use your range-finding tools as his little windows of getting inside. I think it's easier for Fiziev to do that because, as we were both noting just a few minutes ago, he is lightning fast, man. Like watching Fiziev and trying to imagine him against Riddell after having just watched Riddell versus Dober, the gulf between Fiziev's hands and Dober's hands is notable. He's a very everything. Yeah, he's very
speed,
quick.
Defense, hands. Like he is much faster than Drew Dober, and probably, at least for the first round, a good deal faster than Brad Riddell.
Yeah, I don't think he's got the thudding power, but
no.
Yeah, very fast. Go on.
Yeah, and that leads us to the most obvious dynamic of the fight, the one which pretty much everyone has keyed into, which is that Steve's probably going to have a really good first round.
Yeah. How do you figure,
if
Phil?
He survives into it, Riddell is probably going to have a pretty good third round.
Yeah. It's one of those fights. Like, Riddell, the true counterpuncher, is a slow starter who, I don't know, you were just watching his fight with Drew Dober. You were saying how it was closer in the early going, and there is like a turn where Riddell just starts to get his reads, and the fight is more or less going his way after that. But there's still a lot of competitive moments. By round 3, however, he is just tooling Drew Dober. Right? He gets hurt in round 1. He has some dicey moments in round 2. Round 3, he's just completely picking Dober apart, landing his counters at will. Getting creative, walking him into things, leading more, throwing more kicks on the lead, because he doesn't have a jab. I mean, he does. Both these guys know how to jab. They just don't really use it. And Fiziev, as I've already said, gets tired round 3. He's absolutely going to lose the third round to Brad Riddell if it goes that long. I'll make that prediction as confidently as I like, because frankly, Phil, there are no consequences if I'm wrong. But yeah, he's gonna just force the issue. We've described Fiziev in the past as like new age Lando Venata, and at the risk of really underselling him, because he is, I think, significantly better than Lando Venata. That early shocking moment seems very, very likely against a slow starter who needs to get his reads like Riddell. That's the other difference between these guys, I suppose. What enables Fiziev to, because in a weird way, they have some similarities. Both of them, like at range, are really kickers more than jabbers. Both of them will key in on the opponent's range offense to find theirs. What makes Fiziev so much more effective? Like, why isn't he a slow starter? Why is he capable, this guy without a jab, of just getting in people's faces? Is it just the speed?
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't think he's just like quick. I think he has really good reflexes.
Yeah. And
he uses those in the service of like a defensive system. He will, like slip and roll. I think you mentioned, there's a little bit of roteness to him, but I think, it's that he will, if he sees things coming, he will commit to defensive options very quickly and very hard.
Yeah.
And in that way, he sort of, that's also something which Jose Aldo tends to do.
Sure.
That he's just a naturally reflexively gifted fighter with a defensive system. And I think like Fiziev's, the like depth and craft of Fiziev's defensive system is, I think, probably like the most underrated aspect of who he is as a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we mentioned, it was sort of broken down a bit by the end of that Bobby Green fight. But we've also seen that happen to Jose Aldo against a big long opponent with a jab who was very diverse and very, very clever and who could sort of push him out of position.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he does have a very good defensive system, and he uses it right away because he's just really, really quick.
Yeah.
with Riddell, I mean, it's just really interesting watching Riddell fight, because it seems like Riddell will not slip until he's been punched once. Like,
he's not rote. He is a very non-rote fighter. There's definitely a system. There's a way that things fit together. But Riddell's not going to bite until he's got the read.
Yeah, he will. And in the early going, Riddell will block punches with his arms if he sees them coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it. And he won't. And the difference between him and like the early going of the fight, and compared to the late going, is pretty stark. You know, as mentioned, sort of in the same way that Fiziev can kind of exhaust himself by committing to his defense so much early. Riddell doesn't have the same defensive moves at the start of the fight. He just won't bring them out. Just catch and pitch, pretty much. But later on, he'll be slipping and rolling and kind of like using little subtle adjustment steps. He looks like a completely different fighter.
Yeah, it's the steps too. That to me is like the why would you notice that watching his fight with Drew Dober? But all the little adjustment steps, these tiny little angles, even like mid combination when he's countering Drew Dober, it's delicious. I love it. I get like a feeling of physical satisfaction when I watch those sequences. I think it is like roteness. Roteness is a thing. This is a thing that I am obsessed with. I've talked about it the entire time this show has been around. One of my many false distinctions, false dichotomies. The idea that, you know, some fighters, but I think it applies here. It feels like the biggest difference between these two guys. Like, is the idea that some people's brains work like sort of just repositories of information and not brains, you know, it's like, it's muscle memory as much as anything else. But when some people are trained in a fighting system, it's like you run through certain set combinations. What you're developing is the instinct to, I think, attach pieces together and move them around. But not necessarily the flexibility of a fighter like Brad Riddell, who is making reads in the moment, is sort of compiling how he wants to win the fight every time he fights anew. Each opponent is like a unique puzzle to be figured out. I think that's why Fiziev is such a scary fast starter, because he doesn't do that. But the flip side of that is like the unfortunate connotation of calling someone rote is always, I think, that that's somehow lesser, but it's not the case. Like, there are degrees to both these sort of mindsets, if they can even be said to exist. And for Fiziev, you really see that the benefit of having this big repository of interchangeable moves, this sort of like assembly line layout of pieces that you can just plug in, is that he is incredibly good at putting techniques together.
Yeah.
Rafael Fiziev can throw let's call it like not a combination, but let's call it like a 10 action sequence where it's slip, hook, right hand, straight left jab at the end, slip, body shot, kick. And there's no hesitation. Those moves just fit together neatly right away from the very beginning of the fight. He's not in these exchanges looking really closely at his opponent and thinking, is this the right time to throw this hook? He's learned in training that when you throw the hook, you throw the right hand after it because it usually works. And if that doesn't work, he can slot in a different variation on that in the next round or whatever, listen to his coach's advice. He's a super fast starter because of that, I think, at least in part. And Brad Riddell is sort of the opposite in that, he only almost puts like a few different techniques together, and they tend to be shorter combinations, but there is way more feel to them. There are little adjustment steps mid-combination. There is defense that is not set on any kind of pattern, that is executed because it's the right defensive move and because it leads to the counter he knows is available. He's just he's a nuanced feel fighter in a way that Fiziev is not. And again, that doesn't make him better. I don't know if that's good against Fiziev, who is going to be out there just getting shit done right away and getting way more shit done than Drew Dober at more ranges. And by the way, way better, I think, at countering what Riddell sends back at him. Because it's not like Fiziev's roteness limits him from recountering when the opponent responds to his strikes either. He is happy to extend an exchange for a long time because that connectivity between all of his various techniques, that's like the thing with Fiziev. And by the way, again, he's fast as shit. So
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the sort of way that that they view the opponent is that when Fiziev gets into an exchange, just like the options kind of light up to him.
Yeah,
that he can very quickly take them, and every time he sees an exchange, there's a big enticing sort of list menu of things that he can do, and he can do that very, very quickly. He can just scroll through the menu very, very fast. Whereas
it's like playing Kingdom Hearts. I hate that fucking interface.
Fortunately, I have not played it.
Oh my God.
But
why would they make you use a menu in the middle of a fight? Go on. Sorry, go on.
Well, I think Riddell is thinking about his opponent's tendencies much more. Essentially, he is trying to learn their timing, and he is trying to learn trying to learn what they do. Whereas I think Fiziev is simply just like, when this happens, you do this.
You can see it in their faces when they fight. Like Fiziev is excited.
Mm-hmm.
And Riddell is like studying. There is a completely different vibe that the two of them have. Riddell is, he's like the most watchful fighter in the division, probably. He's a really, really attentive striker. So like, and that goes to his advantage here, right? Like, here's one sequence, just as a very small example, again, from his fight with Drew Dober. This is in round 3. He's gotten his reads. He knows what Dober's about. Nothing is working against him anymore. He, rolls under like a Dober hook and comes back with a quick little 3-2. Very quick, in fact. That's the thing. Riddell is not slow. And I think he can adjust the speed at which he does things, in accordance with his opponent. But, he lands these 2 shots, and then there's a half-second reset, and then Dober feints into range and goes for a takedown, which is a thing you often see work. So you've got somebody biting and countering and landing their counters. They're going to counter again if you come in again. So now's the time to set them up for a takedown. Riddell just sees it. It's not a trap because it doesn't work. And just stuffs the takedown and then goes back to work. There comes a point in a Brad Riddell fight where the distance is the distance he wants. He's figured out what it looks like when you tense up and prepare to do something. And he is actively watching what you're doing. And I don't get that sense from Fiziev. It's more like, okay, things coming at my face. Slip. What happens when you slip? You fire the 3 moves that come after that. Go, go, go. I don't know. This is all fascinating, Phil. Who's going to win? I don't know.
So a couple of things. I think one thing that bodes well for Riddell is that he does actually start a lot of his combinations to the body.
Mm-hmm.
I think that works. That makes a lot of sense, like considering how much of Fiziev is like works off of trunk movement and just in general like his tendency to kind of fade. Other than that, I think like dynamic between the two of them kind of feel like I'm not as convinced that I can trust Riddell to take 2 rounds.
Yeah,
I thought I would be. Like, I'm not sure I trust him to win the second round,
yeah,
which he needs to. And I'm not really and he doesn't really have like he's got many advantages over Bobby Green in terms of like power and so on, but I'm not sure if I trust him to be able to like shred Fiziev like in quite the same way that Bobby Green did. I don't think he's going to be like pushing him out of the way of his shots quite as much as Bobby Green could. I think just like I've sort of there were a lot of times in that Dober fight, I mean, particularly in that second round, where Riddell, when he becomes confident in his reads, will really swing for them.
Oh, yeah.
And there were points when, like, he was inches away from, like, being put in a terrible position. Drew Dober does not really, like, out of the way of things particularly well, or is not in position to counter than he is afterwards. So do kind of find myself like a bit concerned that people are slightly underestimating how consistently like defensively sound Fiziev can be.
Yeah.
Particularly against someone where he doesn't have to worry about them being like a foot taller than him.
Yeah.
So, like, the other obviously interesting thing is that, like, these guys kind of know each other and they've trained and sparred before.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know...
You think that would benefit Riddell more than Fiziev?
Yeah.
Riddell's the learner.
Yeah, maybe. But also, it just... The quick starter, it just means that they're even more confident. I mean, because that was like one of the dynamics in like Woodley Woodley Lawler.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was like, oh yeah, these guys sparred, and Lawler kicked the shit out of him, as he obviously did. You know, it's obvious as you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, he came out and Woodley was like, I know how this guy fights, and I know how he starts fights, and I know what I've got to do, and he just dusted him instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if it's quite as simple as like guy who you can't make yourself not a slow starter. That's the problem. You can't kind of adjust your way out of it. I don't think it changes that dynamic. Fast starters are fast starters, and slow starters are slow starters, and that doesn't really change between people who have trained with each other, unless they really train every day. I mean, same thing, I guess, with Usman versus Burns. That apparently people just like, oh yeah, that's basically what happens with them all the time. Is the Burns will go out and like start winning, and then Usman would just take over. So I think, like, weirdly enough, it doesn't change the dynamic at all. At least in that perspective. I think it's just in terms of like who won, and from having, I don't know, listening to like reading interviews from Riddell, it sounded a tiny bit defensive. Like, I'm not going to count what happened 4 years ago. I think we're pretty much the same. We've both grown a lot, and I don't know, it didn't really sound like, oh yeah, I totally know that I'm. It's like, I think Raf is one of the best strikers in the division, and I want to challenge myself. Didn't really sound like gave this guy the business, and I'd just like to fight a striker. I don't know. He might just be like a pretty quiet, contemplative guy who doesn't like talk shit much, which I think might well be true.
Seems like the case.
Yeah, there's not much you can really take from it.
Yeah. I don't know. You know,
it's a really tough one.
It's a fantastic fight too. I just want to see it.
In five rounds, I think the would be a pretty clear pick.
I think Riddell's. I agree. I would pick Riddell in a heartbeat if it were a 5-rounder. Yeah, the thing is like Riddell has had, frankly, like more worrying moments than Fiziev in the UFC, just because he does start slow and he has to figure every opponent out anew. And so even guys like not that these are bad fighters, but like Alex da Silva can really make him look a little shaky early. But then once again, no matter who it is, by round 3, he is just like playing with them, and has completely figured them out. I think the body shots are a really interesting idea against Fiziev. It was an adjustment he came up with against da Silva. It worked great against Dober. He loves to lead to the body and then come upstairs. But I basically share your concern, I think, about him just dropping 2 rounds. Like, at what point can Riddell lose round 1, scrape by round 2, and then dominate round 3? At what point does the opponent just do enough that second round isn't scraped by? And Fiziev does a lot, man. He's just a maniac. And he's going to be kicking, and he's going to be defending, and he's going to be pushing the pace, which may, who knows? Maybe that forces Brad Riddell to get into the exchanges sooner. That kind of happened against Drew Dober. In fact, I think the first turn in that fight kind of came sooner than I expected because of that. It was only, by the end of the first round that Riddell was really had sort of shifted the momentum, even if it was a bit dicey after that. I don't know. I
think I'm going to take Fiziev just for the fact that I just don't know if I trust Dell to win the second round. I think Fiziev is just a defensively much better striker than, like, everyone else sort of needed to keep attacking Brad Riddell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
well, do you think Fiziev is not going to keep attacking Riddell?
I mean, yeah, but it's the fact that everyone else just got drawn into wars with him because they had to get drawn into wars with him.
Yeah.
Like Drew Dober and Alex da Silva and so on, these are not, like, defensively good fighters.
No. That is the big thing, is that Fiziev is like, it's a kind of matchup Riddell has scraped by before in shape, but Fiziev is himself a great technician.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just going to pick him to pick up 2 rounds. I think, like... Yeah. I mean, it's not like Riddell... It's going to be a dicey one. I think it might be a bit, bits of Beat-esque.
Yeah.
He might get into some serious trouble again in the 3rd round.
Yeah. But it's not like Riddell's been knocking people out.
He's stuck in 5s.
It's not like Riddell's been knocking people out in these dominant 3rd rounds either. He's a counterpuncher, so, like, unless it is the perfect punch. Yeah, I'm going to take Fiziev as well. Too strong a start is sort of what it feels like. We'll see. I'm fascinated to see it. I mean, I think at the very least, Fiziev is going to get a strong start, and it will demand some very impressive and creative answers out of Brad Riddell. I want to see how this one twists and turns.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think this is the really enticing one of the card. I think Font Aldo is obviously incredible fight, but also I feel like they're kind of known quantities in a way which this one isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. All right, let's take one more break then. When we come back, Pettis Horiguchi, and is there anything else on this card? Not really. We'll see. We'll see after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We just got done preparing ourselves for Bellator discussion by just talking shit about Dana White. This is something that UFC fans of UFC fights just have to do. It's a sort of ritual, and now we are prepared to discuss a fight between Sergio Pettis and Kyoji Horiguchi, which is taking place under the auspices of Scott Coker, who is a good man, an honest man that you can definitely trust, who has never screwed anybody over or like had like a 60.
Trust him with your pets.
Wait, is there a story there?
That was Bjorn Rebney.
Oh, right. Yeah, it turns out you shouldn't really defend any fight promoters. Just don't. You don't have to pick sides. None of them are on your side. But anyway, Sergio Pettis, Kyoji Horiguchi. Interesting fight. I gotta say, I really do enjoy that Sergio Pettis, like, the UFC never seemed to know what to do with him. And that he has, found he's flourished outside of the octagon. And, I have appreciated seeing that. I always thought Sergio was the kind of fighter who would mature very well because he is such a solid technical striker. And I think he has. He has really turned into a very calm, adaptable technician because he's just, he is a technician. He's always been the anti-Anthony. And now he, I think quite admirably, according to Sergio himself, asked to fight Kyoji Horiguchi. I think he said he felt that, Horiguchi was the lineal Bellator champ. And he wouldn't feel he was the champion until he beat him, which is an attitude I very much respect, and probably an attitude that Sergio Pettis, being a famous little brother, has had his entire life. And who knows who will be the next real champion if he does beat Kyoji. But it's certainly a fascinating fight. What do you say, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great fight in, the way that we like to say we'll do more often. We often say, like, we're going to cover more stuff outside the UFC. This is exactly the kind of stuff I like to see. But it's also, as you kind of mentioned, for both these guys, it is in itself a referendum on the UFC because the UFC let both of them go.
Yeah.
I mean, Horiguchi in particular has to be one of the most egregious drops in recent memory. I mean, you could possibly say, if there's one thing that UFC has been good at doing, it's been dropping older fighters who have then gone on to not look great.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a terrible, awful thing they do, which they're actually quite good at.
Sure.
I don't know what they were doing with Kyoji Horiguchi. It was just dumb.
He just got, I think the story was, he just got offered more money by Ryzen and they weren't willing to match it. Which, who knows, maybe, for all we know, Ryzen offered an insane and unreasonable sum. But I don't...
Yeah, I mean, maybe they just thought he could be the next big star for Japan. Hopefully they did offer him lots of money because he's worth it and he's great.
He's fantastic. And yeah, I would have loved to see him. I hope it's a better thing for him as a person, but can you imagine if Kyoji had stuck around at flyweight? Well, they're still trying to rebuild that division, which, despite having some excellent fighters, remains a shambles since the era when they got rid of Kyoji. If he went to bantamweight, there are 8,000 matchups I can think of right now I want to see Kyoji Horiguchi in the UFC's bantamweight division. What the fuck? Yep. He's made to be a UFC bantamweight. So yeah, that sucks. But this is a good fight. This is one that I would have been happy to see in the UFC. And one for which there does feel like a weird sort of scarcity of parallels on both of these guys' records.
Well, I think on one of their records.
On one, there's one that you found. Which
it's hard to find Sergio Pettis in Kyoji's records,
right? Because you've got Kai Asakura, who's kind of
he fights. Yeah,
go on.
He often fights weird people.
Yes, especially since going to Ryzen. But even before that,
strange that.
Even before then, like you have two counterpunchers in Kai Asakura and Manel Kape that he has fought pretty recently, and but they're not like Sergio Pettis. They're not like steady output, like again, a certain sense of roteness to Sergio that I think really favors him. A willingness to just keep finding and making openings and taking the targets that are available. You don't have that, especially not with Manel Kape. You've got, I don't know, like a scrappier, messier version of a reliable counterpuncher in like Neil Seery, who, and I think it was his retirement fight, or very close to the end of his career. He was already like 40 at the time he fought Horiguchi, and that was also way back in 2016. Who else do you have? But you think you got a good one on Sergio's resume for
it's Joe B.
Joe B.
You're talking a like big like stance switching blitzer. They actually pretty good wrestling and grappling game. It was one of those fights where it was actually one of I think there's no like surprises that everyone's going to be favoring Horiguchi for a number of reasons, but this was also like one of the better performances of Sergio's career. This was really him rising to the occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Benavidez is actually a decent analog for like how the Gooch approaches a fight.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, lots of stance shifting, blitzes. They've both got like that similar kind of jumping body kick.
Yes.
I mean, obviously the main difference and the concerning one is that like Horiguchi is like notably a fair amount bigger than Joe B, and also like younger and faster. And so once he closes in behind his blitzes of strikes, then stops once he's in the pocket, is a much better striker than Joseph Benavidez.
Yeah. Although it still probably does not have the depth of Sergio. In fact, I scratch the probably. I still think there's an element of Kyoji, which is like he is a blitzer at heart. So there's still an idea that like I'm going to get into the pocket and hit this one defensive move and then really, really sell out on the shot I really want to land. Where Sergio does not do that. He maintains his position basically all the time, whenever he can.
Yeah, so I mean that was some of the really interesting stuff in the early going of that of the Benavidez fight, because you'd get Benavidez like leaping into range and trying to fox Sergio by like shifting, then coming back from the other side, and Sergio would just watch him and just drop him. Just like, what is this? Would just punch him in his face whilst he was shifting.
Mm-hmm.
Like as you said, like very calm, very collected, and like quite difficult to trick in that way.
Yeah, and I think that was if you call that the maturation of Sergio Pettis, that fight, which in some ways I think it was. I think he's become more of that fighter since. He seems more assured, more calm, more just carefully watchful. More capable of just going with the flow, even against a crazy fighter like, old Joe B or not nearly as old Kyoji.
So, I mean, there's...
Mm-hmm.
Sergio is often sort of thought of as a second-tier fighter. I mean, I suppose in some ways he is, because he always got kicked back whenever he was really gaining momentum. He does have some quality wins. I mean, Benavidez and Moreno are both aged pretty well as wins, especially because, the Benavidez fight looked like it was the end of the line for him, and it actually wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
He went on a very good 3-fight streak after that, but also, him Sergio completely mopping Brandon Moreno, who then... Was that also like Moreno's last actual loss? Oh no, he lost to Pantoja right after that.
Mm-hmm.
But, stuff that's aged like pretty well.
Yeah.
So I do actually expect like Sergio to be quite competitive in the early going for this one.
Yeah.
If not win 1, maybe 2 rounds. Yeah.
Do you think there's a tendency in Sergio throughout his career to fade as the fight goes on? I still don't think he's a physically imposing fighter. And I think a certain amount of tie-ups and pace, I think he slowed down a bit against Joe B, who essentially just went extra apeshit in round 3 and rallied to take a round off of him. I think he did to an extent against Cejudo. I think against John Moraga. In fact, with Sergio, there's a weird thing. It doesn't even seem like he always fades round 3. It's like there's always just one round where he's not there. Because I think against John Moraga, it might have been round 3, but it might have also been round 2 where he just wasn't keyed in.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is like so calm and focused on what the opponent is doing that he can he can be one of those fighters who sort of runs out of ideas. He sort of loses the thread of what his opponent's up to. And it takes him a while of just looking around for it to pick it back up again. Which leaves you with these portions of empty space. But yeah, in the past he definitely has. And the weird thing, and generally just again, it can be matched back to the maturation thing because he has just it's been a sort of taking his eyes off the road kind of thing, which happened in his debut against Alex Caceres, which Alex Caceres somehow replicated super recently in a fight where he was really struggling and then suddenly just RNC'd the other guy out of nowhere.
And I call it
but yeah, I
very
think
accurately.
The main thing about that Benavidez fight is that, as I said, it mostly says a lot of good things about Sergio's chances, but the other thing is that he gets pushed into the fences by the blitzers a whole lot, and he gets clinched up with Joe B a whole lot, and Joe B isn't the best offensive wrestler, but especially not nowadays. I think he certainly was. That is certainly a part of his game which sort of left with the sheer physical power of sort of early career Joe B. But Kyoji is also not the world's greatest defensive MMA wrestler, although a pretty good one. But he is also a sneakily good offensive wrestler.
Oh yeah, and in both contexts, he's a tremendous scrambler. Unless you're Darian Caldwell, I guess.
I mean, the Darian Caldwell fight is is not great, but also somewhat forgivable in that Caldwell is
a giant,
really quite a bit bigger than him,
yeah.
And also a very good MMA wrestler.
Yeah.
It's pretty much him and DJ for people who have been able to really actually wrestle Horiguchi with any consistency, which is, pretty good going. It's the fact that I think when was it in Horiguchi's career? Was it before or after he fought? After he fought DJ, it was, yeah. So after he got fairly comprehensively out wrestled in that fight, he then went back and just out wrestled Ali Bagatino for 3 rounds. Just pretty much just decided to just learn this stuff then. He is a phenomenally talented fighter.
He's a great athlete. He's one of them cheaters. I don't think Sergio has ever had the quality where he could just pick something up and easily learn it like that.
You heard that they asked, I think, was it Mike Brown? They asked him who was the most who's the most talented fighter in American top team. He was just Kyoji.
Yeah.
Didn't even need to think about it.
I believe that.
They've named I think they've named a hall after him, American top team.
Have they really?
Yeah. He's apparently also just an incredibly hard worker. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's to me the trouble is, I am expecting Kyoji to have some wrestling success. I'm expecting him that if worse comes to worst, he can just sort of physically overwhelm Sergio a bit. with wrestling and with impact of strikes. And the problem is that I can see Sergio banking rounds, like you said, maybe 2 rounds early, without even a huge amount of difficulty. But can I see him like replicating Kaya Sakura, like just knocking Kyoji out? Because that feels like what would need to happen for Sergio not to have a much worse moment later in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to pick Kyoji.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, there's a physical and athletic hill that Sergio's never been able to climb.
I just think that's the big thing. I've loved Sergio's recent run, but like I don't know that, kickboxing for the better part of 3 rounds with Juan Archuleta is really much of a parallel for fighting like just an insane physical fighter like Kyoji.
Yeah, and it's not, we're not talking just an insensate, untrained athlete here. We're talking an incredibly hard-working, disciplined, and also extremely athletic and talented fighter.
Yeah, and one who, in the days since that like one-sided loss to Demetrius Johnson has shown some ability to come up with, even if it seems like half the time he's pulling it completely out of his ass, to come up with late fight adjustments that turn things around. Of various different kinds.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly ballsy, pick to fight him from Sergio, I think.
Oh, yeah. I respect
that.
That's
real, it's real daring to be great kind of stuff.
It's also, like I said, I think real little brother stuff. I think Sergio is keen, to this feeling that we all have about him. Of being like second fiddle. And I think that's why probably he really has something to prove.
It's a shame because we love him on this show.
Yeah.
Great.
I've always loved Sergio, man. I've always been like, how come Anthony, it's this bullshit cheater who just head kicks people and shit? How come he's got all the shine? His little brother's actually good at fighting.
Truly is the heavy hands brother, isn't he?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. He's
exactly the kind of one where everyone else would be like, my God, look at this other guy doing his running off the wall ninja kick. Gonna be there going, actually, his little brother is quite a bit more technical.
This
has the real eyes of a counterpuncher.
This fellow's got a sharp jab. That's me. That's what I sound like. Yeah. I'm not going to apologize. I'm still also going to pick Kyoji, the Anthony Pettis of Japan,
you have to.
Over him. So,
it's also one of those ones where, like, it won't be that sad to see the athlete win because I love Kyoji too.
Oh, of course. He's a very lovable guy. Yeah. All right. That's it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. 3 really compelling fights, to be honest, that we got to talk about, which, maybe shows the wisdom of, stretching out over different promotions. But also it's just like, I don't know. I'm excited. There's going to be some small glove kickboxing happening this weekend. And, that is always a pleasure to break down. And, for whatever reason, Phil, I don't even feel that scared for Jose Aldo yet. I don't think that'll come until halfway through the UFC main card. And then I'm going to get really, really scared and maybe stop watching.
The dread is just going to start creeping up on you.
Yeah, because I know what I've done. What fate I've sealed for him.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be all right until...
Of course you are.
Probably until it's just about to start, because I'll at least know that it was something that you did.
All right, well, that's it for this week's episode. As I said, find Phil for more witty rejoinders like that on Twitter at EvilGregJackson. You can find me at BoxingBush, BUSCH. Make sure you check out our Patreon. There's a little bonus episode up there with a little more from our discussion with Ben Cohn on last week's episode. And what do we have coming up next week, Phil? Does it suck?
Oliveira Poirier next week?
Is it?
I don't think it is.
All right, folks. Then unless Phil's a filthy liar.
It is Oliveira Poirier.
It is?
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll be back with more good shit next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, This time you actually did come to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.